This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
My name is John Moffat, and this is a short lecture introducing paper F9 Financial Management, where I want to talk briefly through the syllabus, what the exam's about, the style of the exam that you're going to have to take, and finally, how to go about using Open Tuition to study for the exam. So first of all, to explain what financial management's about, the financial manager's job is to make long-term decisions for a business. And to explain the sorts of decisions, and therefore the syllabus, I've written up there a very summarised statement of financial position or balance sheet. So you can see we've got non-current assets 100,000, current assets of 20, total assets 120. The share capital and reserves, the equity, the shareholders' money 60,000. Non-current liabilities, long-term borrowing, or we call it long-term debt borrowing, 55,000. Current liabilities 5, so again 120. Well, the decisions a financial manager's having to make, first of all, this company, the total money they've raised, the long-term money, there is 115,000. They've raised 60 of it from shareholders. They've raised 55,000 of it from long-term borrowings. So the total long-term money in the business is 115. Well, they can raise that money in various ways. They could have raised it all from shareholders, for instance. Here they've decided to raise it part from borrowings and part from shareholders. And for each of them, you know, they raise money from shareholders. There are different ways you can go about raising money from shareholders. And equally, long-term borrowings. There are several different ways in which you can go about borrowing money. And so that's one of the financial manager's job, to decide how are they going to raise that 115,000. We call it sources of finance. And that bit of the syllabus, in fact, doesn't involve calculations, really. It's much more discussion. But you are expected to be aware of the different ways they can raise money. One major factor in deciding how to raise the money is the cost of it. And by cost, I mean, if they borrow money, they're obviously going to have to pay interest. If they're borrowing it from shareholders, okay, it's not interest, but they do have to pay dividends. And so one factor, that business obviously wants to borrow money in the cheapest way. And so here there are calculations, what we call the cost of capital. There's quite a lot of little things involved that can be asked in determining the cost of the finance. So those two areas very much go together. But having decided that they've raised 115 in total, what's happened to that money? Well, of course, most of it, as you'd expect, has been invested in our non-current assets, our machines, etc. And so another job of the financial manager is to make sure it's invested well. That if we're thinking of buying a new machine, which costs $1 million, we want to make sure that it's giving sufficient returns to make it worthwhile. Or if we need a new machine but with a choice, you know, we want to decide which is the better of the two machines, you know, which will give the better returns. And so another major bit of the syllabus, we call it investment appraisal. Which here is very much arithmetic, calculations. But deciding whether a machine is worthwhile or not. And that you should have done some work on before, either in paper F2, net present values, or whatever exempted you from it. Most of it does involve net present values, but it does clearly get a bit more involved at paper F9 than it was in paper F2. So where are they? They've raised 115,000. Most of it, 100,000, has gone into new machines. But where's the rest of it gone? The rest of it has gone into what we call our working capital. There's 20,000 current assets, receivables, inventories, and whatever. 5,000 helps finance it. It's up to our payables, but there's a net 15,000 there, working capital. Current assets minus current liabilities. So that's where the rest of the money's gone. And of course, a business needs working capital. Any business normally is going to need to accept a level of receivables. You've got to offer credit because the competition offers credit. Most businesses, depends on the nature, but most businesses need to keep a certain level of inventory. So we need some working capital, and the money has to come from somewhere. That's the other 15,000. But the working capital doesn't actually earn us money. You know, it's the machines that are earning the money. And so we want to make sure our working capital is kept under control. We accept we need receivables, but we want to keep them as low as possible. We want to make sure we collect them efficiently. You know, maybe if you offer them a discount for paying fast, they'll pay fast. Because the working capital, although we need it, it hasn't meant another 15,000 has been borrowed of long-term money, and it's going to pay interest on it. So it's important to manage it properly, keep it under control. And again, it's a made with the syllabus, and a lot of individual techniques involved. How to manage receivables, how to go about trying to get the money sooner, how to manage our inventories. Now, for all of these, some of it's purely discussion, other bits involve learning some arithmetic. So they're the really key things. A couple of other things, though, for the syllabus, which I can't really show on that picture. But something called business valuations. You know, if I was thinking of buying that business, how much is it worth? I can't simply rely on the figures in the balance sheet, the statement of financial position, because they're just book values. You know, the machines could be worth a lot more, they could be worth a lot less. And so there are various ways you can go about estimating a value for a business. And it's not hard, but there are several different approaches that you need to be aware of. And finally, something called risk management. Where although as with everything, it's extended when you come to paper P4, at paper F9, there are two aspects of risk management you need to be aware of. The first is foreign exchange risk management. And without obviously teaching it here, what we're getting at is suppose we buy a lot from abroad, perhaps we're in the UK and we work in pounds, we buy a lot from America where obviously it's dollars, and maybe we owe a supplier $100,000, so we're going to have to convert pounds, but perhaps we're not going to pay it for another 3 months. And of course, the trouble is that whatever the current exchange rate is, in 3 months' time, it could be different. And depending on how it's moved, maybe we end up paying more, or maybe we end up paying less when we convert to pounds. But there's risk. Well, there are various ways that the financial manager can go about reducing or removing that risk. And so we know in advance exactly how many pounds it's going to cost us. There are, well, really two sets of calculations you need, which you'll see when you come to watch the lectures. The other one, though, is interest rate risk management. where you can't be asked calculations in paper F9, but you are expected to know what it is and how, and to be able to discuss ways of getting around it. And essentially what it is, if we are borrowing money, although clearly we'll know what the current interest rate is, interest rates can change, may go up, may go down, there's risk. But again, no calculations at F9, but discussing ways that are available to the financial manager to try and remove or reduce the risk so we're not affected by changing interest rates. So that's more or less the syllabus. You can see the full syllabus on the ACCA website, but it's those headings. It's just as I've already mentioned, under each of those headings, there are lots of individual techniques that can be examined and need learning. All right, the next bit is the exam itself. And the exam, there are two types of exam. You can either do paper-based, where the answers are written out one can on paper, or they have the computer-based exam, where you do the exam on the computer. And it's essentially the same exam, whichever one you do. A couple of differences which I'll explain as I talk through it. But whichever you're doing, there are 3 sections, A, B and C. Section A has 15 multiple choice questions of 2 marks each. And they're all compulsory. There's no choice in this exam at all. But you've probably seen the sort of questions I mean if you've done any of the earlier exams. But a short question and then a choice of 4 answers. And if it's paper-based, you write on the table, they give you whether it's answer A, answer B, answer C, answer D. If it's computer-based, you click the right choice. They are fairly short, obviously, the 2 marks each. The only slight difference with the computer-based, whereas the paper-based, all of them just have 4 choices and you choose the right one. The computer-based, most of the questions are, again, pick one of 4 choices, but some of them where you're asked to calculate a number, instead of giving you 4 choices to choose from, they have you actually type in the number that you've calculated. Section B is similar, except they split it into 3 bits. There are essentially 3 questions. So the questions are a little bit longer, give you a bit more information, but then on each of them, there are 5 multiple choice questions of 2 marks each. So again, your 15 multiple choice, it's just that 5 of them are all based on 1 question, 5 of them on a second question, 5 of them on a third. And again, paper-based, you will just write down whether it's A, B, C or D. Computer-based, 1 or 2 of them may have you actually type in a number when there's been a calculation. Finally, part C. There are 2 what we call long form questions, where it's a full question, and instead of ticking an answer, you're expected to write the answer out in full. And each of them is 20 marks. And always each of them is split into sections. There might be a part A, a part B, a part C. And part of each question will be calculation. Maybe part A calculates something. But then written parts as well. So part B may want you to discuss what you've calculated in part A. Part C may want you to explain something. It's just a combination of a written and calculation. The paper-based exam, you'll show you calculation workings, and they give you an answer booklet. You'll write the workings out in full, when it's a written part of the question, you'll write it out in full. If it's computer-based calculations, the computer comes up with a little spreadsheet, and you put your workings in the spreadsheet. For the written parts, it'll come up with a word processor, and you type out your answer. Now, I think I would imagine you're all familiar with spreadsheet word processor. These are just like Microsoft Word, Office. If you're not, then you better practice if you're doing the computer-based exam. And those questions, parts A and B, are all marked by computer. Whether you're paper-based, it goes through a machine, or whether it's on the computer itself. These long-form answers, again, whether it's on the computer or whether it's longhand, they're marked by people. So there we are, and in total, there's, you can see yourself, 30, 60, 100 marks. The pass mark, as with all ACCA exams, is 50. If you score 49, you failed. If you score 50, you've passed. Now, one final difference between the two exams: if you're doing the computer-based exam, you've got 3 hours. If you're doing the paper-based exam, you've got 3 hours and 15 minutes. Which might initially seem, it'd be easier to do paper-based because you've got longer. In fact, firstly, it's only 15 minutes, but secondly, the ACCA did do some testing and found that with paper-based, it does take that little bit longer to read a question than it does on computer because of the way it's presented, and that the 15 minutes makes up for that. So essentially, the level of difficulty is identical, and they are the same questions. What you really should do to make sure you've understood what I've said about the style of the paper is look at the specimens on the ACCA website. There's a specimen exam for paper-based and a specimen for computer-based. Alright, so that's the syllabus, the style of the exam. Finally, how to go about studying for it using open tuition. And if you've been using us for earlier papers, you'll be aware of this, but for everybody's benefit, what we've got available, and it's all free of charge, obviously, but we've got lecture notes that you can download and print out, which cover the syllabus, and to go with them, we've got free online lectures, which you can only watch online, but like this one, where we go through the lecture notes. Rather importantly, the two do go together. The lecture notes, although they do go through the syllabus, they're not meant to be a study text, because it's in the lectures that we work through the examples and discuss them and explain and expand. So you must use the two together. If you do, then you don't really need a study text. Our lectures and notes go through more than enough to be able to pass the exam well. In addition, we've got online practice tests, where after you've watched the lectures for a chapter of the lecture notes, then you can find an online test of 5 multiple choice questions just to check that you've understood it, and they're the sort of type of MCQs you get in the exam. We've also got a full practice exam. I say a full one, it's only sections A and B, because section C requires humans to mark it. Ours has sections A and B. And you should use this when you've finished your studying. The computer will come up with the questions, When you've finished it, it'll come up with a mark, and you can work through and see which you got right, which you got wrong, and see the explanations. And we draw the questions from a big bank of questions. So although there are only 30, 15 for part A, 15 for part B, the bank is a lot bigger. So every time you try that exam, you're likely to get different questions. Also, and very important, are the forums. We've got two forums, the ordinary F9 forum, which is where students help each other. Ask if you've got a problem and other students will chip in. But also an Ask the Tutor forum. Where again, if you do have a problem, if you put it in that forum, then I'll answer certainly within 24 hours and usually a lot faster. Finally, although that's what we offer on the website and that's all free and it does cover more than enough to be able to pass the exam well, what is absolutely vital for passing F9 is question practice. Now, okay, we've got these practice tests, we've got the practice exam, but the more questions you practice, the better. And you really should buy a revision or exam kit from one of the 3 ACCA approved publishers. Some call it revision kit, some call it exam kit, but they're full of exam standard questions. Together, obviously, with answers and explanations. And you really must have one. Practicing that the style of questions and the tricks they put in is every bit as important as the studying. However well you know a topic, you've got to get used to the way they can phrase questions and the way they can try and trick you. And because you're doing it at speed, it's so easy to make silly mistakes, even if you know something perfectly, if you're not used to the type of question. So there we are. I hope that was helpful. But now it's time to actually start studying and working through the lectures.